We're going to talk about the miter saw today. The miter saw is a very handy tool, and it's usually the first tool we use when we're cutting longer boards. We have a really long board here down to smaller sizes so we can use them in our projects. Okay? So in our 7 steps, it is rough cut to length. So we have a really long board here. It's too much for us to handle in our different tools here, so we're going to cut it down and take care of it. You should follow along with the sheet here. The video will be kind of one window, and then you'll have the sheet with all the safety rules in another window so you can follow along. Okay? So general safety A, use a sharp blade, not a dull one. I sharpen the blades every year, so I make sure they're sharp. And a great way to test that is to run the edge of the blade on your fingernail. And if it scratches your fingernail along the edge there, you want to use your fingernail there. And as you can see, my fingernail is scratched up. That's how you can tell if you have a sharp blade or not, is running that edge along the fingernail. I have drawn a line here at 6 inches. You can see that there. Here's where the blade will be. We want to keep our hand 6 inches away. That includes your thumb too. Don't get your thumb, let it creep over here. Make sure your whole hand is 6 inches away. The down position is here. So when you're done cutting, it should stop in this motion here. So let's go ahead and pretend like we're cutting, hand 6 inches away. I'm going to turn the saw on and let it come to full speed. I'm going to bring it down and push back. I'm going to let it stop, kind of show you the whole process. Here we go. So let it stop in the down position so we don't have the blade showing, and that'll be a little safer. So the wood has grain to it. You can see these little lines in here. I'm going to go ahead and draw them darker so you can see them better. That's grain, okay? Just how the tree grew in different ways it grew. So when we use this saw, we're going to cut across the grain only, okay? So here to here, it's going across the grain. So we're not going to cut with the grain. So in other words, this would be very dangerous. So it's very dangerous here to cut with the grain on this saw, okay? Number one, you can probably see I can't keep my fingers 6 inches away, okay? I don't have to get too close to the blade. And number two, sometimes the blade will start falling in the grain and it will cause troubles, okay? So on this machine, we're only going to cross cut across the grain only, okay? Next one is when I keep the wood on the table and against the fence. Both places, this is a test question, okay? So we're not going to hold the wood off the table as we cut it, or we're not going to hold a wood away from the fence as we cut it. We need to have it down on the table and against the fence. Because this blade turns in the position where, let's watch this blade and how it turns. So I'm going to lift up this guard temporarily. I'm going to turn on the saw and notice which way the direction of the blade turns, okay? You can see here it turns toward the back of the saw. Okay, well, when we start cutting, it's naturally going to go ahead and try to pull that back toward the fence. Okay, so if you don't have it against the fence when you start cutting and you have your fingers caught back in here, it's going to swing back and smash your fingers. Okay, plus it's kind of dangerous. Well, you've been seeing me turn it on a couple times. There's a trigger right here, and most saws have a trigger of some sort that you would pull. So you go ahead and pull that trigger, it comes to full speed pretty quickly. Use the supports in our table. And as you can see here, we have some supports here. They're called outboards. They're just supports. So outboard table, there's one on each side here. And they do fold down, okay? And if I were not to use these supports here, I'm gonna go ahead and lower this one here. It'd be really hard for me to hold this wood down and cut at the same time safely. So we use these outboard stands. Make sure they lock into place, and that supports the wood and helps us cut it safely. Okay. Next, we want to start the power, and we want to start the blade off the wood. So we don't want to have it on top of the wood when we start the saw. It's going to bog it down too hard. It's going to be too difficult for it to handle that. Okay, so we want to be off the saw, even if it's just a little bit. We can start it here if you wanted to. Okay, we don't have to start from way up here. And sometimes it's easier, especially when we're trying to line up our saw, okay, with the next point here, where we're going to cut this. And now we need to talk about that next, okay? All right, so this is called the face of the wood. This is called the edge. And then this part here is called the end grain. Okay? I will talk more about that later. All right? So we want to add 1.5 inches to our finished length. Okay? Our finished length today is going to be 16. So that's our finished length. And so I want to add 1.5 inches to that, which will end up being 17.5. But I want you to notice a couple things here on this piece of wood. On the end of this wood, we have a couple issues here. We got a big chunk out of this here, okay? But a little bit more worrisome is this big crack right here. I don't know if you guys can see there's a crack there. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm just going to cut off this piece here, okay? And I'm going to mark where I want to cut it in the middle of the face, okay? In a few seconds here, we want to line up the blade on the waist side. That'll be a test question, okay? So my waist side is definitely here. This is the waist. I really don't want that. I do want to keep this side. So K for keep, W for waist. So I'm going to line up the blade real quick so I don't lose a little less wood, because the blade does cut off an eighth of an inch. I'm going to line up my blade on this side. I make that a habit of marking an X on the side I want to cut, okay? And that helps me remember. I don't have to think about it anymore. Danger zone on this saw is behind the saw. Since our blade turns this way, if anything's going to get thrown back, it's going to get thrown back there. So just don't stand back there. So let's get ready to cut this piece of wood here, okay? And this is a sliding compound miter saw. It slides forward and backwards. It's called a miter saw because I can cut angles on here too. But in our world, we're just going to use it to cut straight, okay? Later in Woods 2 or other Woods classes, you'll cut angles or different miters, okay? You use this to like trim your house out. All the trim in your house, you have to cut 45-degree angles everywhere, okay? And so the next one is pull the blade halfway past the front of the wood. So I'm going to call this the front edge of the wood right here, okay? And if I were to cut straight down right now and cut through, I wouldn't cut all the way through the wood, okay? I need to pull half the blade past the front edge of the wood. So there you are. Here's half the blade, and I've pulled it past the front edge of the wood, okay? And that way I know I'm going to cut all the way through first. So I'm going to cut, push all the way down, push all the way back, all the way off, and all the way stopped in the down position, okay? My left hand's going to hold against the fence and down to the table, okay? I'm going to line up the blade on the waist side, so there's my X there. So I'm going to slide this down a little bit, put my blade, nope, I'm on the keep side right now. Let's line it up on the waist side here, boom. Pretty darn close, you can see that right there. I'm on the waist side. I'm pulling the halfway out, okay, half the blade past the front edge of the wood. I'm holding it down so it doesn't wobble, okay. I'm going to pull the trigger, come to full speed off the wood. I'm going to go all the way down, all the way back, and then all the way off. And then I'm going to go ahead and remove that excess scrap piece of wood. So here we go, let's cut this up. Okay, now you can let up. And basically now we've cut off this piece of wood that had our crack. You can see you can probably see it better there. It's about to break. And there's this chunk here, okay? Let's do our real cut now. So remember, we're adding 1.5 inches to our finished length. And for our finished length here for this project, which is the cutting board, is going to be 17.5. So I'm taking my tape measure, finding 17.5, marking in the middle of the face. And I didn't talk about why we do the middle of the face. Let's talk about it now. If I mark in the middle of the face here, it's so much easier for me to line up my blade, okay, and get that lined up with my line. Now, my waist side has changed. Now, it was before over here, it was the waist side. Now it's over here, because now I want to keep this chunk of board here. That's my keep side, K, and my waist side here. So I'm going to mark an X on the waist side, line up the blade, pretty darn good. Same procedure. Just make sure you pull it halfway out, start at full speed off the wood and down and back. All right, I have my first chunk of wood, rough cut to length. It is a rough cut, it's not the finished length because we'll do other things to it, and we'll have to have a little extra wood to work with this piece of wood and get it to where we want it to be. Okay, there's a couple more things I got to show you that kind of come up a little bit. All right, there's some issues sometimes when we have our rough wood. Sometimes we don't have a good edge along the fence because it's bowed, or maybe there's a bad section to the piece of wood. We just get we get a gap here. You can see the gap. I can almost put my finger in there. Okay. As we were to cut this piece of wood could be pulled back as we're cutting. And if you think about the physics involved, as we're cutting back and it gets closer and closer here, all of a sudden these two pieces of wood are going to get tighter and tighter on the blade. And all of a sudden we're going to bind the blade. It's going to sound really bad. So what you have to do is if you see something like this here, okay, you need to flip the piece of wood here and get it so that way we have a nice, pretty good edge. We can do with a little bit of a gap, but this here was just too much of a gap. Okay, so if you ever see that, make sure you flip the wood onto the other edge and see if that would work. If that still doesn't work, let me know, the instructor know, and we will help you cut that piece of wood. Last but not least, remember I said this wood can cut miters. You can kind of see this is cut at an angle here, okay? And I had a kid try to cut this, and you can see the problems here that were going to happen here. He was trying to cut this piece of wood. It was just too small. The blade caught the piece of wood because he wasn't holding it firmly because he was just way too close. He was getting a little nervous. The blade caught it. You can see it chunk out there. This door was open at the time, and it just threw it about 50 feet out the back door, and it really just threw that projectile pretty far back. Luckily, he was okay, but this can be dangerous if you're not doing things properly. Okay, you can cut wood on the edge on this, but you got to have plenty of wood, and we usually like to clamp it to the fence and do a bunch of stuff. This was a wood stew project. Okay, so I like to show that too. So that's the miter saw. It's a great tool to use. You'll use it a lot. So make sure you just follow the safety rules. And remember, you can always look back at your book or your notes before you use it. And we'll have lots of fun using it on step 1 in the 7 steps, rough cut to length.